Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Roundtable Podcast. We have a interesting episode planned tonight on freedom of speech. To get us started, we're going to immediately jump in instead of doing our usual introductory questions. What should free speech protect, and what do you think it actually protects in society today versus that? We're going to start with Nick. Nick, you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go.
I had my wrong microphone input selected and it just didn't work. So, free speech should protect you from the government deciding just to silence dissent. But in reality, laws like USA Patriot, uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism, Act of 2001, and the Sedition Act make it an unreality. Mostly just kind of a veneer.
Sure. Let's move on to Sam.
You just asked what should free speech protect, right?
What should free speech protect, and what do you think it actually protects in society today?
The full question. Free speech should protect ideas, especially the ideas that make people uncomfortable. If free speech only covered the polite, agreeable, socially sterile discourse, then it's not really free speech. But that's what it actually is. Because what it actually protects depends entirely on who holds the current cultural power. Most people are only pro-free speech until the speech in question involves something that names one of their tenets or something holy of theirs and perhaps speaks of it in a bad light. Then suddenly you have exceptions, qualifiers, interpretations to the speech. So the principle of it is universal, but the application is largely tribal.
Well put. Let's move to Jackie.
So, when most people bring up freedom of speech, they usually mean something a lot bigger than what the Constitution actually promises, which is protection from Congress passing laws that restrict your speech. The First Amendment reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's the entire scope. It doesn't cover your boss, it doesn't cover private organizations, and it definitely doesn't guarantee that people have to like what you say. The average person tends to assume that the phrase applies to every corner of life, like it's this universal shield they get to hold up no matter the situation. You'll hear people say things like, well, I have freedom of speech, so my employer can't punish me for what I posted. And that's just not how it works. Your employer isn't the government. If you walk into work and say something they think damages the company or makes them look bad, they can and should respond to that. The First Amendment only keeps the government from silencing you. It doesn't keep your job from firing you. It doesn't stop the internet from roasting you. And it doesn't force anyone to give you a platform. Freedom from government punishment is not the same as freedom from consequences.
Well put. So not quite the question that was asked. Let us move on to Alex.
Well, Myth stole a lot of my thunder on what freedom of speech kind of means in the current sense, versus like as in what it actually does shield against. But for the extent of it, of basically for me, is that it is a shield against government encroachment, not social encroachment. There were examples of laws where you could not have what was considered unacceptable content, which would include very like sexually charged things, all the way up until relatively recent times. But it was not federal laws. Federally, they could not. That is what freedom of speech and of expression and of religion is. It's a protection against federal encroachment for the most part. And I'm kind of losing my train of thought right now. I'm a bit scatterbrained right now. Apologies to everyone. It's been a rough day or two. My 18-year-old cat is not doing well, so I'm kind of a bit slow on the take. Yeah, I can't think of anything else other than basically what Jackie put, because that was generally my similar outline.
It's fine. Not everyone has their brain together on every day.
Mm.
You, of course, most days don't.
Vicious.
Of course. Of course.
So
Hey.
to clarify,
Wow.
my full answer was that what it actually protects is what I think it should protect. By the way.
Okay. So I think free speech should protect everything when it comes to words, besides committing things like fraud and using it in the pursuit of theft and ruining someone's livelihood therein. Threats, perfectly fine with. They should be allowed. Insults, get thicker skin, or go to a state that has mutual combat laws. Problem is, culturally, what it protects today is people's feelings. It doesn't protect speech so much as the feelings of the people society deems to be lesser than and need protection. And I think that that has been a big shift in the last 40 to 50 years that needs to be corrected. I'll now open up the table to everyone,
Question.
including the audience.
When it comes to attacking people's livelihood and fraud, for example, does that include examples of slander or libel? Basically, the intentional bearing of false witness, falsely claiming that somebody assaulted a woman, for example.
Yes, if you falsely claim that someone committed a crime, for example, I think that you should be able to be brought to court over it.
I think if you follow the concept of your rights end when somebody else's rights begins, that'll cover most bases. So like you said about the slander, well, you've impacted somebody else's ability to live their life, and that's impinging on their rights. So your rights ends when somebody else's begins.
We're a bit listless tonight, guys, but it seems everyone has said what they wanted to say for this section. Let's go on to the next question. Should speech ever have consequences? I'm going to start with Alex.
Yes, I do think speech should have consequences, though I will preface it with I cannot think at the top of my mind right now of any form of speech that isn't already criminalized, such as slander, libel, etc. I cannot think of any non-criminal ones that warrant violence. There's a very clear distinction between that. Words are not violence, so you do not meet non-violence with violence. This is not a matter that ought be escalated. Though, if one were to tell the employers of this individual who say falsely claim that you are neglecting your children or that you are attracted to children, then I see no problem with there being consequences where that individual is fired for spreading such baseless slander by informing their place of employment, etc. So yes, I do believe that speech should have consequences, just not violent consequences.
Excellent, well put, and it certainly fits your worldview. I'm going to move the question on to Nick.
All right, so I think speech having consequences only makes sense when it turns into actual malice, kind of like the current standards for slander and libel against a public figure. So to be made into actual malice, then you have to know that it's false and or recklessly disregard whether it was false or not, and intentionally be trying to ruin someone's reputation using it. Now, of course, I'm sure most of us have heard the phrase "talk shit, get hit," so I don't want to hear anyone complaining if they purposefully rile someone up and get decked for it.
Yeah.
Fair enough. From Nick, we're going to go to Sam.
All right. I think speech should have consequences, but not the kind that involves handcuffs in courtrooms because somebody online got offended, or perhaps somebody at the store did not like the hat you were wearing or your response to their attempt to shame you. Now, it's completely natural if you speak your mind that people will push back. Obviously, they'll disagree, argue, they'll tell you you're wrong. That's completely fine. That's part of the human social contract. We always keep each other in check. And that's also how ideas sharpen, because you also constantly have to challenge the other person. What I reject is when these consequences turn into state-sanctioned ideological policing. For example, the UK. You can literally get arrested over a tweet. Not a threat, not incitement, not slander, not libel. Just a post someone found offensive. The police will show up at your door because a stranger took a screenshot and sent it to the police force. Canada's not very different, considering what we're doing right now with the Bill C9 that's currently being passed. Anti-hate bills with definitions so broad that it's impossible to figure out what it means, and therefore you cannot draw a line. Right now, for example, in Canada, we do not know if simply quoting from the Bible constitutes a hate crime or hate speech. We do not know. This will have to be litigated in court if this bill passes. So, in short, I think social consequences should exist. Debate, allow people to push back against ideas, but the state should never have any power here.
We will move on to Jackie.
In terms of legal consequences, I think what we've got in place is far enough. We don't need any more on that. If it doesn't fall into what is already legally accepted as the limit to free speech, then there should be no legal consequences for it. As for social consequences like 0, I'm all for it. Like, a great example is the people who were celebrating Charlie's murder online, who got exposed to their bosses and lost their jobs. I think that was very, very, very much justified.
We'll move on to me. I personally do think speech should have some consequences. We already went over free speech. I obviously do mean criminal consequences for things like fraud, but I also think it should have physical consequences. I am very old world. I think the Vikings had the right idea with the holmgang, where you could challenge someone to a duel over their words. I personally believe that if you want to insult another man, you should be able to back up that insult with a physical confrontation if he finds offense to your words of such great note that he challenges you to such. Back when it was a thing, it made words have more weight behind them and you considered them more. In my personal opinion, at least. Of course, when it comes to your employer, they are a private employer and they are free to choose who represents their company. And if you break that representation, they are more than free to fire you. I will now open to the entire panel to discuss what people have said and comments that have been given on YouTube.
I think I would expand it further, like for additional, like for extra clarifying, that the consequence thing would also extend to historical Christian churches, where if somebody was speaking blasphemy, they are, as Paul commands, they're to be scolded and corrected. And if they refuse to, you go to the elders, and if they still don't change, they can be kicked out. That is another example of consequence where one does not need to be forced to affiliate themselves with those they wish not to affiliate with, as consequence for speech that is not liked. This would also extend to other social groups. Could be clubs and other such things.
Does anyone have any?
I will say that I am very much open to there being physical consequences to certain speech as well. Like, the one fight that I've ever been in was because a guest in my home called my stepmom a bitch. And so I proceeded to beat the hell out of him. And I think I was justified in that.
You're not insult the host in his own home.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, deserved. Did you break any bones?
I don't think I broke anything. I did draw blood, and it was stopped when he pulled a knife on me.
Yeah, I'll bring a knife to a fist fight.
Yeah, that hurts, and then you're gonna get injured when you still try to beat his ass.
Knife is ouchy.
Yeah, knife fights suck.
I have a question.
Of course.
What about people that got fired over their opinions on COVID?
Is that something that goes into free speech, or is that something that goes into bodily and medical autonomy?
I'm specifically speaking of the people who would post on social media that they think the vaccine, the new vaccine they came up with was not trustworthy, and they were citing issues with spike proteins, and then in the next breath they find themselves fired. Rather
Well,
than
you're talking about people that were talking about their opinion on the research towards the
yes,
virus.
I believe
and
there
its
was a
effects.
doctor that got delisted, and they took her license for it as well.
They also tried. They also tried to cancel Dr. Robert Malone, who was one of the researchers that helped to actually develop the types of vaccines that they later used.
So
The mRNA.
should they have been like? Do you think they should have been sanctioned or fired
Whether
from
I
their
think-
jobs or
whether I think they
socially?
Whether I think they should have been or not, well, they said something their employer didn't like, so they got fired. That's how it works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unless it was the government
Pressuring.
pressuring the business to fire them, then I cannot be consistent in if I condemn that
I cannot, in
act.
good conscience, condemn a private business for their practices of firing an employee that does not represent the face of the business.
The extent I would do would be to basically spread the word of like-minded individuals that such and such businesses punish the type of wrong think that we and us like-minded individuals are quote-unquote guilty of.
Though, interestingly, for people talking about mRNA vaccines, the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine does not use mRNA.
Hmm.
So, if there's an issue, if you have an issue with mRNA being used for some reason or other, there's a different one that uses the standard method.
Oh yeah, there were several vaccines.
At this point, I'm just going to be honest. Even if it's not logical, I'm just suspicious of any vaccine for COVID.
My logic for not taking the vaccine has always been the same. I am a young man. I stay at home most of the time. I never even get close to people. So I do not see the point of me taking a vaccine with potential side effects that could be worse than the actual disease. I've been social distancing since I was born.
Haven't we all? Haven't we all?
No. Let us, if no one else has anything to bring up, we will move on to the next topic. I will take that as a no. And move on
What
to the
about the
next topic.
comment that that Darn Otaku made? Or is that
Yeah, he
has that been addressed?
referenced he directed a message at Alex.
Oh. What was it?
Yeah, I'll read it out for you. He said,
I zoomed in. I kind
Oh.
of disagree with you that sometimes that force should be used, especially when the speech is directed at the possibility of a threat. The count either external or county. Okay. To the county, either external or internal. I'm not sure I understand.
I don't think I get it either. Directed at the possibility of a threat to the county?
Well, I mean, if
You
it's a
might mean country.
that would fall into the line of basically like freedom of speech of somebody basically talking about security information or
state
things-
secrets do not fall under free speech.
yes.
Yeah, that falls into treason and sedition, which are capital offenses.
Or if it's things pertaining to, okay, I could probably steel man vaccination arguments, which is that it is for the protection of society and the maintaining of social structure where you can subvert the people's speeches as a matter of public safety. Like I can I can see it from that angle, but also as a matter of principle, I'd never do that because all it takes is one declaration of a national emergency to subvert all civil rights.
Yes, because that's never happened before.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no country has ever done that.
1930s.
We would never have thrown hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans into concentration camps. And took
I
all
don't
their
know what
shit.
you're
Jesus
talking about, Nick.
Christ, man.
I don't know what you're talking about, Nick. That didn't happen in history.
No. Like they say, it didn't happen, but if it did, it was justified.
The United States glows gold in the morning light. No spots on its permanent record.
Gold like pee.
That's about as
We'll
stained
move
as
on
the
to the
record.
next topic. What do you consider the line between offense and harm when it comes to speech? I will start with Alex.
Difference between actual harm and offense. This is where it's a bit of a gray area because in some cases that seem similar, I would not consider it actual harm, but others it's offense. An example of, I'm not sure if people are, how many people in the audience are aware of this, but there was a lady that ran something like a rescue shelter for foxes. And she was bullied so heavily online that she took her own life, leaving her husband and young daughter. That ended up resulting in the actual loss of life because of bullying. A lot of the stuff that was being said was not considered illegal. By the book, these things were not illegal, yet they did contribute to her taking her own life. So obviously it did cause harm, but yet in a legal sense, it was not illegal to do so. So that's where this topic is it's really in the mud, not exactly clear-sighted. But how my own definition, unfortunately, my definition is a bit arbitrary on the matter. Because if it causes emotional distress in someone, I'd say it would cause harm. But also, yet, if I was saying that I believe somebody else's religion is false and I provide receipts why I think their religion is false, that could also induce emotional despair that can lead to drug and alcohol addiction or them ending their own lives because they fall into nihilism. So basically, it's arbitrary. It's through an arbitrary lens of my own preferences. So in some cases, I would consider something as, yes, it's harmful, but it's more harmful to restrict it. So I can't really think of a clear delineation and prescriptive on what would be the line between harm and just offense.
Or sometimes a question is not clear cut. I would like to go next. I personally would like to say, yes, what happened to that young woman was a tragedy, obviously. Should have never gone that far, and the people that took it that far should be condemned socially. But there should never be, even if your speech causes someone emotional distress on the level that they collapse internally in that way, it is still speech. It is up to the person that speech is directed at to deal with the speech through their own outlets and to allow others in their own personal circle to brace them if need be. Speech cannot cause true harm unless it is speech meant to personally incite a physical attack against someone instead of attacking them emotionally. In which case, yes, but that would make you accessory to assault or murder or something of that nature, which is beyond what speech is. It is a planned attack physically. And I would like to then throw it over to Sam.
I think there is a difference between offense and harm. So, for example, if you feel challenged or uncomfortable or irritated by what someone said, that's just offense. That's not necessarily harm. People can have disagreements all the time, but you see many cases in which people simply take the disagreement and then turn it into an attack on themselves, which is not really the case. Harm, on the other hand, I'd say the best way to explain it is it's similar to what Alex said, but I would go further and say that targeted harassment is harmful speech. Incitement to violence and threats, obviously. Though lately in these days we've blurred that line because we treat emotions as evidence of harm. So, for example, you said the lady took her own life. She let her emotions get the better of her. She could not process them in a healthy way, and so she ended up taking her own life. I wouldn't say it's her fault per se, because that's generally the conclusion people can take from someone saying that she couldn't handle her own emotions, and they immediately assume, "Oh, you're saying she did it. She did it to herself." Not necessarily, but we cannot on the same vein we cannot treat being offended as being endangered, because offense is simply somebody sharing their ideas. That is not harmful by definition. And if we treat it like that, society becomes a padded cell where nobody says anything remotely offensive, and then we end up saying nothing.
Well reasoned. I'll move from Sam on to Nick.
So, I think where it goes from offense to harm is when the speech is designed to actively cause a detriment to the living condition of a person, either by consistently making an intimidating or hostile workplace, kind of like how harassment is currently defined, or if you are, again, trying to incite like violence against someone. And of course, if you're just lying about them, I will say at some point when you're doing actual malice, then that might become harmful. But my line there is arbitrary, as is most feelings around free speech.
Very well. On to Jackie.
In the most simple way I can put it, for me, offense is primarily emotional and harm is primarily physical. We see this line get blurred and sometimes completely removed a lot these days, especially among certain parts of the LGBT crowd. Just as an example, I'm not targeting anyone. But if I were to use a term they don't like calling them the Rainbow Squad, instead of their preferred label, they would get offended. Probably rightfully so, to be honest. They would most likely call it hate speech, though, and say something along the lines of words or violence. In their framework, being offended is equivalent to being harmed, and I have to push back on that. Feeling insulted is in no way the same as being endangered. Offense is emotional discomfort. Harm is actual threat or damage. When someone tries to erase that difference, when they treat a word they dislike like it's a physical attack, it shuts down every meaningful conversation we can have.
Well put. I will now open it to the panel. Is there anything about this subject that you want to bring up? Is there anything someone else said that you want to challenge?
Not a challenge, but a kind of a confirmation of what Jackie said pertaining to when it comes to trying to mix offense and violence together, like a few less than reputable members of the, as he put it, Rainbow Squad. That is especially dangerous of a situation because these inadvertently become de facto blasphemy laws. Just so long as you have enough social currency to be able to press your finger on the scales of being able to brigade against individuals. And another example on the flip side, for those who are listening who are, let's say, on the more skeptical side of religion, that there are certain conclusions within liberal scholarship for those who study the ancient world, including the history of Israel and of Judea. You can make a genuine argument and case that the scholarly works of the likes of Dr. Bart Ehrman or Dr. Kip Davis, Joshua Bowen, and Francesca Stavropoulou has caused distress, despair, and harm to Christians and Jews alike. And inadvertently, if you could make the case that words are violence towards groups who are of alternative sexualities, because that you're making an argument of what you believe is the truth, you could also inadvertently force in blasphemy laws that would result in them being either barred from the United States or being actively arrested because of their scholarly conclusions. And this is a very dangerous thing to target academia because of your conclusions, quote unquote, cause harm.
Any questions, concerns, comments from the listeners or from the panel before we move on?
There was a comment, but simply a statement.
Mm-hmm.
That Darn Otaku says, I agree that when the speech that successfully incites murder, destruction, or terrorism or revolution, that to me is harmful. Bullying, heckling, etc., that isn't as harmful in the physical sense.
Okay, we will be moving on then. Comedy in modern culture, has it been restricted or expanded compared to the previous cultures of history? I would like to start with Alex on this one.
I would say that it has been far more heavily restricted in some ways, but more open in others. Beforehand, there was a much greater social disdain for those making jokes about Christians and Christianity in general. Nowadays, people hardly bat an eye. Generally, the only time that Christianity jokes are pushed back on is if they refuse to use the beat stick evenly and they refuse to make jokes about, say, Islam, Judaism, or any other religious group. In other senses, they get very offended, very upset, and far more restricted. And you can see that with examples of Jerry Seinfeld saying that he doesn't really do comedy shows anymore to college students or at colleges because they whine and complain. Or
let's move.
Actually, sorry, real quick. And additionally, as can be seen with the latest Piers Morgan episode, where he could not seem to understand the concept of edgelord humor and was just constantly pearl clutching again and again for 2 hours.
Very well. Let's move on to Nick.
I've read some older comedy works, Midsummer's Night's Dream and all, and they kind of suck. So I'd say either comedians have gotten more proficient at the art of comedy, or the art of comedy itself has expanded much more than it's been reduced.
Short and to the point. Agreeable.
Well, I
I'll
don't
go
got
off of
anything
that
else
for
to say
myself.
about it. Like the older comedy works just kind of suck, in my opinion.
I have read a few of the Greek plays that were comedy based. And I would say that comedy has not so much expanded, but changed to a modern melting pot culture and therefore has more avenues to go down that people actually understand. It has expanded culturally because of that, but comedy has always been relatively on the fringes of society and understood as such. There are not many cultures, though I can think of a large one, that restrict comedy legally. There have been some, like there were some monarchs that restricted comedy against the royal family. One of the few things I disagree with monarchies on. But overall, I think comedy will always remain relatively unrestricted. And even when laws are put in place, it will try to push against them because humanity needs comedy. And I will throw it over to Sam.
See, I would say mainstream comedy is more restricted. And it's as Alex said, the venues are ridiculously hypersensitive. And so we've seen the model shift to every comedian and their mother doing a Netflix special or an Amazon Prime special, or they just do stuff that is pre-screened, pre-filtered, pre-approved by what do you call them? Test viewers? I forget the actual term for them. Demographic people. Help me out here, guys.
The test
Test
audience.
audience.
Test audience, that's it. So they go through more safety checks than actual aircrafts. But also, like Alex said, outside of these places, comedy is great. For example, certain Discord servers where things can get a little wild. Little weird online pockets. Like Fuentes' edgelord humor. I disagree with what the guy says. I just think it's really funny that he had the balls to go on a Piers Morgan show and just roast him the whole time. And Piers Morgan thought he had some kind of moral high ground, which he might have had, but at the same time, he just did not understand the appeal of someone like Fuentes. Comedy's about poking the edge of whatever society's trying to hide. It's always been that way. And if you don't like it, it just leaves the room and goes somewhere with fewer pearl clutching hall monitors.
Well put. Before we move on to Jackie, I'd like to say that I disagree and think Fuentes had the moral high ground more over that debate. But let us move on to Jackie.
I don't actually consume a lot of comedy. So I don't actually think I have a view on this topic. I don't consume enough comedy to actually share an opinion here.
That's fair. Sometimes there'll be something that you just don't have an opinion on. I'm going to open it for commentary, topics that people want to bring up in relation to this, disagreements. Go ahead, guys.
I think comedy can also include your own sense of humor and how people react to it. I'm sure you've had a situation at some point in your life where you said a joke and somebody just gave you a blank look or tried to shame you for it.
I am usually the person giving that blank look.
I had a person at work that tried to shame me for going to a puppet show.
Why?
Dunham?
Why?
That's like
Yeah,
Is
Dunham.
Yeah, yeah. Let me guess. Islamophobic because he has the
Oh
Ahmed
no,
the Dead terrorist.
racist
Towards
all of them,
minorities.
which?
Uh,
Yeah.
I had a huge disagreement with that person.
Or hey, hold on. What are his puppets again? He has
every minority possible and a white guy. Trailer park trash.
Walter. He has Ahmed the Dead terrorist. I forget who else.
He has the pickle.
There's the Mexican one.
He has the old white guy, the trailer park guy. Walter.
Yeah.
There were a few. He has the purple one.
Purple one.
He's got Thanos.
Yeah, looks
Is he racist
No.
towards Thanos' race?
looks
No, that would
looks
be
like
so
a freaking
deserved.
Muppet. Looks like a freaking Muppet. But
And
he has
Muppet
all
racism.
sorts. He even has Joe Biden.
Yeah, Joe Biden.
Well,
Peanut the
also
drug
all
addict.
Joe Biden.
What a name.
I know
was-
someone whose nickname was Peanut.
And the show was called I'm Not Canceled Yet.
That's great.
Perfect.
It was a great show. He trashes on every group. So the idea that he's racist towards minorities was ridiculous. Yes,
Yeah, no-
thank you. That darn otaku. It was Peanut.
Generally, what happened? Yeah, you're right. Like a lot of comedians have dealt with this. There's this Australian fellow that was
Isaac?
that. No. I think his name is Jim Jeffries.
Oh yeah, Jim Jeffries.
He had a comedy routine where he would be making fun of different religions, and then he made a joke about the Jews, and a Jew in the crowd got pissed, and he said, "You were laughing along with the rest of them when I was talking about shooting Muslims from a helicopter, but now you're mad." They selectively choose what they get offended by, which takes us back to the whole difference between offense and harm. People just don't have the mental resilience to be able to go to comedy shows anymore because they just get offended at everything.
True. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up before we move on to the next topic?
I got nothing.
Neither do I.
Very well.
Nothing.
We're going to move on to the next topic. And this is personally directed at everyone. This is a very personal, subjective thing.
Okay.
How do you deal with what you think and how you filter what you say? I'm going to start. I typically don't. The only place I do is work because I need a job. Let me bring up a story of this time I was at a Mexican place eating lunch. I was talking to a friend about slavery. And one booth over, a black chick got offended and laid into me about how I, as a white man, am not allowed to talk about it. Now, most people would either ignore them, placate them, or do something similar. Instead, what popped into my mind and what I did was I turned around, looked them up and down, and said, if you were my slave, I would have whipped the skin off your back for talking to me like that. And then I turned back and continued my conversation. They did shut up. But I think that if you are filtering what you think versus what you say, unless, of course, the setting calls for it, like a formal dinner or a work environment, it is almost tantamount to a lie. And for me, I would like to move on to Nick.
I just filter depending on who I'm talking to. Like, there's some things I don't say to my friends, some things I don't say, I don't like call my family. Like, it just depends on the setting. I'm much nicer at work than I am to my friends, of course. Things like that.
Yeah. Let's move from Nick to Alex.
Mine is also situational, but there have also been situations where it's not simply a matter of not just simply a matter of being nice, so to speak, because there are examples where you're polite. You try to be polite because you'd rather not make somebody's day even worse, though if they're being abrasive, obnoxious asses, there's also a matter of, is there a risk of them getting angry and escalating something, so best not to speak because you'd rather not escalate into a violent altercation? It's obvious stuff like that, where it's always dependent upon the situation on how I filter how I talk. Not really much else other than that, just I filter it based upon, basically I read the situation, and if it's productive for me to be a little bit more aggressive on things, then I go with that.
And you know me well enough to filter me when I'm on your phone on speaker, generally. Let's move on.
Now I
from
do.
Alex to Jack.
Context will not be given.
So, as a Christian, I try to uphold biblical principles when it comes to this. I don't always succeed, and when I'm among close friends, like on a private Discord call, I exercise less of that caution. But Ephesians 4:15 reminds us that rather speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ. So with that in mind, I try to be honest without being cruel. Then Proverbs 15:1 teaches that a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. That's a constant reminder to be mindful of my tone and my delivery. Sometimes the same words can either build someone up or push them away, depending on how I speak. Colossians 4:6 says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. That guides me in discerning when and how to say something so that it's effective rather than destructive. James 1:19 advises, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. That's why I try to listen first, think carefully, and not let emotion drive my words. And finally, Proverbs 18:21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. Words do have consequences. Speaking responsibly doesn't restrict your freedom. It honors it because it makes your speech meaningful rather than harmful.
Well put. I will move on to Sam.
Saying what I think. I used to never do that when I was younger. I was always, well, I wasn't taught it specifically, but society more or less taught me to just keep my mouth shut. Otherwise, I'd find myself dead in a ditch somewhere. But after I lived in the West for a while, I opened up. Now I'm a chaos gremlin, as some people love to call me. I just stir the pot whenever I can. Though I will admit I try to avoid saying things that truly hurt someone unless they provoke me first. So I wouldn't say I start fires. I would say I poke people mischievously. But if there is something that needs to be said, I will say it, even if it upends the whole table. I'm not interested in self-censoring out of the fear that someone might interpret my words in the worst possible way. I used to do that, and that is a losing game. You'll constantly feel like you're walking over eggshells, constantly analyzing what you say and how you say it, and who will offend, and that is not good for anyone's mental state. So my approach became simple. I don't sugarcoat the truth. I say it plainly. And if somebody pushes back, I don't retreat unless they have a point. If they have a point, generally they believe in the dialogue. If they don't have a point, they just want you to obey whatever it is they spouted at you.
Well put. Let's open the panel.
Crickets.
Cricket, cricket. Seems no one else wants to discuss this further.
Let me think.
Okay.
Shaman says, I speak due to necessity or required by situation. Otherwise, I am just simply a listener. I am not the greatest at all the time, but this is what I attempt. If I am to speak, it will be in honesty, as I cannot lie due to reasons.
I would say
Okay.
something I cannot ignore in society is hypocrisy. It physically bothers me seeing hypocrisy. So I have to point it out and call it out.
Which bothers you more, self-aware hypocrisy or completely unaware hypocrisy?
I would say completely unaware. Self-aware hypocrisy, most people who are self-aware, rather, most people who are aware of their own hypocrisy generally tend to attempt to minimize it. So they might admit that, yeah, you're right, I'm being hypocritical here. I'm going to try to tone it down. Those who don't realize it, on the other hand, are an infuriating sort of person.
Now,
Here's Morgan in the Nick Fuentes debate.
What if the one who is self-aware, they simply do not care? Like they're fully aware of how it is hypocritical. You walk them through the steps of it and they acknowledge, yes, I know every single one of these steps. I just don't care because holding two diametrically opposed opinions makes me feel good.
The problem with that is I also tend to hold diametrically opposed opinions on certain topics.
Same.
For example, I believe that many people are capable of great things, but I also believe that these same people that are capable of great things will never reach these great things because they're just too lazy.
We do have a question from Shaman for Zero. By what level does this bother you? Most people are hypocritical by nature.
I would say it bothers me because of my own ego. Because I've went through the process of identifying, or at least trying to identify, everything within me that opposed itself. And then I see other people who are supposed to be equal to me not doing it, not taking the effort, not even trying. That's the part that bothers me. Someone who tries and simply rejects it, you can at least say they tried. Somebody who does it and then ignores it, they're probably on the same level that somebody who failed. Because that could also mean they just simply didn't understand what conclusion they reached. It's not necessarily that they rejected it. Is that even though they know the facts, they do not understand them enough to have the impact on them emotionally. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it makes sense to me.
Sense? Is there anything else anyone wanted to say? In that case,
Shaman said, "It is not a requirement to recognize yourself. By projecting that onto others, a side of yourself makes you also hypocritical in nature."
I'm not sure I understand. Oh, you're saying I'm projecting that others need to recognize themselves? I would say I tend to do that because I assume, which I probably shouldn't, but I assume that most people, generally speaking, are looking to better society. And bettering society always starts with bettering yourself, and bettering yourself always starts with examining yourself. Unless I'm completely wrong about that.
So, personally, I don't really think hypocrisy is the word that applies to what you've been talking about.
It applies somewhat.
So hypocrisy is living up to the standards that, or not living up to the standards that you apply to other people. That is what hypocrisy is. So by that token, what you're holding people to is the opposite of hypocrisy, like regarding what Shaman said.
Fair.
Because you're holding them to the same standard that you try to live up to.
And mixed with the preconception that, for the most part, generally most people are blank slates where if they apply themselves, they can reach the same level as you. You don't generally hold to a hierarchy of some people are just destined to be stupider than you.
Yeah, I think very few people are actually stupid.
Yeah, it's lazy. It's generally laziness made manifest into the intellect.
And I wouldn't even consider myself smart.
okay. That is all. Let's move on to the audience questions from the Discord server. For the first, we have Sleepy Programmer, and he wanted us to touch on the fire in a crowded theater, dictation, and its history. I'm going to go first. I think it's meaningless. It came from a bad ruling entirely meant to jail anti-war activists. It is rejected completely by modern free speech doctrine, and people only really bring it up when they don't understand the law and try to use it for their own argument. I will then throw it over to Nick.
I'll give you 1 second. Okay.
We'll move from. Nope. Go ahead.
No, move on. I'm having technical issues right
Okay.
now.
We'll move to Alex then.
All right. Basically, my viewpoint is almost one-to-one identical with Dylan's. Saying to it was bad. It was bad court ruling, and overall, I have a little bit more of a personal investment in that entire backdrop situation because during the war, in combination of people who were expressing anti-war sentiments were getting jailed, there were also German immigrants being harassed and lynched, where they had German flags wrapped around them and then they were basically hung from a lamppost. My ancestors immigrated over here from Hanover in about 1860. My surname, due to actual social bullying by the Anglos and Celts that were where I'm at, they bullied my family into anglicizing their surname. So they were targeted for harassment in that time frame, and it could have been much, much worse if it had been in the cities instead of the Midwest. So that was a period of American history I put a decent amount of investment in to figure out, and Dylan's right on the money about that court ruling being a very, very bad one.
We'll move it back to Nick if he solved his technical issues.
Okay.
Good. I gave enough of a talk to give him time.
Yeah, I got nothing to say that hasn't already been said by Dylan or Alex. I'm going to be honest.
Very well. As these are questions, I'll just say, Sam, Jackie, do either of you want to expand upon this?
So
I don't really
I'm not
know.
familiar with the history of this topic, so
Me
no.
neither.
Fair enough. We will move to a question from Inert Bomb. When do insults turn into hate speech? And is there a higher or lower limit to some? And if so, can that limit be defined? I personally don't believe in hate speech as a concept, and therefore will not be commenting on this one unless I have something to comment on someone else's rhetoric. Therefore, I will throw it over to Nick to begin.
Honestly, I don't know. Any limits is arbitrary, and it depends on when you get to actual malice. I don't know. This isn't something I've put a whole ton of thought into.
Fair enough. Is there someone else on the panel that would like to actually answer this question?
I don't think
Or
hate
feels
speech
well
exists.
enough to?
Yeah, I don't acknowledge hate speech as a legitimate term.
Okay.
Yeah, so none of us
mean-
really acknowledge hate
I
speeches.
mean, I've had people call me certain names. Like I've been called raghead. I've been called Dune Coon. Well, no, I've called myself that. Someone tried to call me another term that I probably shouldn't say on stream. I don't consider that hate speech. I just consider that some idiot saying words that do nothing to me. Like, okay, good job. You defined me in a way that made you laugh. Great. I don't think hate speech exists. Rather, I don't think it
And-
should exist.
Legally it doesn't exist in the United States. Like there is no legal classification of hate speech in the United States.
That's true. The problem is people are trying to make it exist in legal terms in the U.S. and in Canada it already exists in legal terms. So by Canadian law, somebody calling me those names would indeed be committing so-called hate speech. But I do not believe that this person should go to jail and be tried under the Criminal Code of Canada just because he said mean words to me. That's silly.
Very well. Let's move on to another question then. From Sleepy Programmer, there was a poll that found that a lot of college undergrads think that speech can be violence. How do you guys fall in that question? And can you explain the other side without caricature and explain why someone might believe that? I am going to give this to Jackie to start off.
I personally do not believe that words are or can be violence. But I'll try my best to steelman the other side. Words can feel violent because they can cause real, tangible harm to a person's sense of safety, dignity, and well-being. Repeated harassment, perceived threats, or degrading language can lead to anxiety, depression, or trauma. To the person experiencing it, the effect can feel as immediate and real as a physical threat. Also, words don't exist in isolation. They can reinforce social hierarchies or marginalization. When speech is used to intimidate, exclude, or dehumanize someone, it can limit their opportunities for freedom, creating real-world consequences that feel coercive. And for groups that have faced violence or oppression in the past, hostile speech can carry historical weight. Words can signal danger, signal exclusion, and even serve as a precursor to physical harm. Regulating harmful speech can be a way to prevent escalation. Words can set the stage for physical violence, so addressing them early is morally justified. The underlying idea isn't that every insult or unpopular opinion is violence, but that speech can be an instrument of harm. From this angle, calling words violent is shorthand for the real impact they have on individuals or communities, particularly those who are vulnerable or historically targeted.
Recently steelmanned.
Mm.
I will open the panel to responses for this.
All right. That's basically one of the better steelmans for it. The only thing that could maybe be done to supplement it would be to give a little bit more of a specific grounded example, such as, of course, if children who are growing up, children of specific racial groups, say that they are white or Hispanic or Asian, that they witness their parents and the older generation talking in a racially pejorative sense about, say, black people, for example, where it motivates and reinforces in them these negative, horrendous stereotypes about them, where every single social interaction that these children will have when they grow older will always be viewed through the prism of everybody I respected and looked up to hates them. So it should be perfectly reasonable and rational to detest them in turn. So from the very get-go, because you did not actually treat the underlying quote-unquote moral wound, which was open racial antipathy, it's resulted in a bedrock, very, very bad breeding ground for what will eventually become hostile action. Because almost every vicious act of actual malice, not necessarily selfishness, because you can say that a thief or a burglar, they're not doing it out of malice. They need something out of it. They don't want to hurt somebody. Hate crimes, though, are actively malicious. And a lot of murders are actively malicious. So if you are able to cultivate that degree of hatred and malice into the next generation, or your own peers that are struggling in life, say that you've now primed them where the moment they get done wrong by a certain member of a specific racial group, they're now primed to be hate-filled and vicious, so the moment someone makes an offhanded insult at them, they open their throat up with a pocket knife. So you can genuinely steelman and make the argument that in order to prevent the malice and hatred that motivates hate crimes and active violence and ostracization, you should be able to consider it as a violent act under the umbrella. You don't treat an injury once the wound starts to stink. You disinfect it from the very get-go and then sew it up. Waiting means death.
I'm going to use that as a launch pad for my final question of the night. Is free speech worth violence? Is it worth rebellion if the government tries to impugn upon it? And is it worth the violence it may cause? I would say free speech and the ability to express yourself in a way that, doesn't incite murder and the like through trying to make it happen or commit fraud is absolutely worth violence, death, and rebellion against the government if they try to impugn upon it. And I will now go down the panel and get everyone's thoughts on that before closing out the night. Sam?
Could you repeat the question?
Is free speech worth violence? Is it worth rebelling against the government if they impugn upon it? And is it worth the violence it may cause?
Yes. If the government is trampling over people's rights to free speech, then it is not a government that represents the people. Presuming these people aren't releasing state secrets and whatnot.
Basically, state secrets are state secrets for a reason.
Yeah. This is all working on the assumption that the people are well within their legal rights of speech. They are simply stating an opinion that the government does not agree with, and they suppress them in response. That I do not believe in that, and that should be met with resistance on every level.
From Sam on to Jackie.
Yeah, the freedom of speech, along with all of our other Bill of Rights, the rights that are given to us, are worth any cost, in my opinion.
From Jackie to Alex.
I would agree that it is most assuredly worth any cost, including life itself. Life is the most priceless thing, is one of the most priceless things of all. Nothing in this world is free, and these types of freedoms, freedom of expression, the freedom to actually project what is in your mind, which is the self. You very much have the right to project what you view as yourself to the rest of the world, and to protect that. Yeah, my ancestors fought in the Revolution so we could have that. They fought in the Civil War to preserve that union. And I would be a very, very terrible descendant if I did not think that my own life was worth putting on the line for the sake of this freedom.
Well put. Down the line to Nick.
I'm just going to echo the sentiment so far. Like, the government preventing free speech is just, I hate to use the slippery slope fallacy, but like, what are some of the first things dictatorships have done?
Suppress speech.
Bingo. And whenever, even if people don't actually agree with it, a lack of visible dissent creates the illusion that everyone supports it, which will in turn create that as a reality. For instance, the shopkeeper putting "Workers of the World Unite" as a sign outside of his store doesn't necessarily do it because he believes in it, but because it'll keep him out of trouble with the reigning authority. But when everyone does that, dissent becomes unthinkable. Everyone supports the regime.
Good. And now I will end this episode with a quote from one of the greatest men in history who founded America on the freedom of speech.
For if men are to be precluded from offering their sentiments on a matter which may involve the most serious and alarming consequences that can invite the consideration of mankind, reason is of no use to us. The freedom of speech may be taken away, and, dumb and silent, we may be led like sheep to the slaughter.